So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for those lovely readings. Very nicely done. So, this verse that Kathy read from the Bhagavad Gita, it's such a beautiful, simple one, but so profound. It said, "Everyone whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is just a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence." And when we look to the example of all the great masters, teachers of all religions, they're always pointing us in that direction. And in our own line of gurus, they share this sentiment. They're saying, don't look at me, it's God that's behind it all. When in the Bible we read when someone said to Christ, I believe it was Nicodemus, said, "My good sir," and Christ stopped him and he said, "Why call you me good? It is only our Father who art in heaven who is good." So he's saying that any virtue, it's not mine, it's God that you see in me, it's God's virtue. And in our the other of our masters, there's the wonderful story that from Autobiography of a Yogi, where from the life of Lahiri Mahashaya and Sri Yukteswar, when Sri Yukteswar is a young man being trained by his guru, Lahiri, and Sri Yukteswar has a young friend who is dying, critically ill, and he goes to his guru and he says, "Master, won't you please heal my friend?" And Lahiri Mahashaya said, "I have no power to heal. Why do you ask me to heal him?" And then Sri Yukteswar understands where Lahiri Mahashaya is going with this, and he said, "Yes, sir, but the God within you can heal my friend." And Lahiri said, "Oh, in that case, yes." And he says, "Take this oil and put a few drops in his mouth," and he gives him a little bottle of oil from the lamp. He said, "Take some oil from that lamp," and he goes, but his friend's already died, and rigor mortis has set in. But Lahiri Mahashaya, and again the example from India of the guru-disciple relationship, Lahiri does what his guru told him. He parts the stiff lips and puts a few drops on the clenched teeth, and the body shudders, and it comes to life, and it's healed. But Lahiri was saying, I can't do it. Even these avatars say it's just God through me. And then remember the episode, the glorious chapter in Autobiography, where an experience in cosmic consciousness, where Sri Yukteswar bestows on Master the highest experience of cosmic consciousness, and after he returns somewhat to normal consciousness, he falls at Sri Yukteswar's feet to touch his feet, and Sri Yukteswar pulls him up off the floor, and he said, "How can you touch my feet when you know that the God that resides in me is the same God that resides in you?" So, it's so beautiful. One might say it's humility, but remember what Master said when someone praised him for his humility. How can there be humility when there is no consciousness of ego? So it's beyond humility. It's just recognizing that the only reality that moves through any of us is the divine consciousness. And then in a parallel episode with Swamiji and Master, when Swamiji was with Master at 29 Palms, and Master was dictating his Gita commentaries, and Swami was just sitting there so filled with gratitude and devotion to be in the presence of such a soul as Yoganandaji. And he helped, Master was done, and Swamiji helped him to stand up, and he was just feeling so much devotion and so much gratitude to this great soul. And Master perceived his thought and just looked at him and said, "Just a bulge on the ocean. I'm nothing. It's the ocean of God's consciousness that you perceive in me." And so then we come to our own lives. And how do we use the example of these great ones to mold our own lives? There's a beautiful book that one of a close friend of Swami's and of Ananda's, Devi Mukherjee, wrote about his spiritual journey, and he called it, and he knew many great saints in India. He called the book "Shaped by Saints." And it's such a wonderful concept. It's what we all need to do. It's not enough just to read about Christ or Master or any of the great ones and say, oh, aren't they wonderful? We have to be shaped by their lives. And we have to say, yes, that's my model that I want to emulate, not the people who achieve worldly success or power or fame. But if we want to know God, we have to model our lives from people who have found Him. And so if we want our lives to be molded in this way, we need to be vigilant. We need to be watching the ego and how it intrudes itself so subtly, even against our will sometimes. Swami has a wonderful book called Sadhu Beware, and he talks about the different little ways that the ego asserts itself. And we need to be mindful of this. When we start to if someone praises us and we start to take credit, oh, I did a good job. What did the great ones say? I didn't do this. God was able to do this. So we don't need to be fake about it. And if someone said, oh, you cooked a good dinner. Oh, no, God cooked the dinner. But in your heart, just feel that. Try to feel that God was flowing through me in anything that you do, anything, your work, your interactions with people, any service that you do, just try to get yourself out of the way. And the ego fears this because if I go, then what is there? But little by little, it's almost like, think of a beautiful statue that the artist has sculpted. Hello. And it's covered with a cloth. And that cloth is our ego. And we're afraid to strip that cloth away because it's all we know. We don't know what's under that cloth. But if little by little we keep at it, and I feel like I have gained the experience. I said this yesterday, but I mean it. We had a beautiful retreat day yesterday for those of you who couldn't come, just to share that. But you see, over being on the path a number of years, you get that perspective, and you see that people who grow spiritually, it's not the straw fires. It's not, I'm going to meditate 5 hours today, and tomorrow, this weekend, I meditated 12 hours. But it's the people who keep at it bit by bit, day by day, week by week, who serve, who have humility, who don't assert themselves, and who just are offering their lives to God. There's a woman at Ananda, she's not here, so I won't embarrass her, but one of the great, great souls of Ananda, Seva. And when she came to Ananda and Swami early on, she was one of his students in San Francisco, and she told her story recently, and she said, when I took a yoga, Swami was teaching a Hatha yoga class in San Francisco, and she said, I went to his class, and she said, I didn't know anything about meditation. I hadn't read the autobiography. I didn't even know what yoga was, but I met Swami, and I knew what he was true. And I thought, wherever he goes, I will go, and I will follow that truth that I perceive in him. And for years she couldn't meditate. She tried, but she served. She had a beautiful spirit, and she confided to me a few years ago, I have a hard time with seclusion because I can't meditate so well. Now she's in seclusion a lot of the time, and she just said, there's so much to do. I mean, you can meditate and then read and listen to talks. And she said, I just love it. But by keeping at it bit by bit, trying to have the right attitude, trying to be devoted and in tune with the Guru, our lives change. And so for all of us, that's really the important thing to remember. Just never give up. Just keep at it, no matter how ineffective you think you are. It doesn't matter. It's the sincerity of the heart and the constant putting yourself, like Seva did, I'm following that truth that I perceive in this beautiful soul that I have met. So follow the example of our gurus and keep at it regularly. And then watch when the ego asserts itself, when you feel like you have to, if someone says something rude to you, then you have to say something back. It was interesting. I had a lovely experience. Divine Mother's always teaching us things if we are mindful. There was a person who, for whatever reason, I don't know, but whenever she would see me, and it wasn't often, but I would see her occasionally, she would always say something like, "Oh, I liked your hair better the other way," or "I don't like that dress you have on," or she would always sort of insult me every single time she saw me. And then I was in a room where she was, and I was starting to get my defensive shield up, like, what is she going to say today? And then I thought, that's just your ego. Just let whatever she says to you, you just smile and say, "Lovely to see you." And I went up to her, and she said, "Oh, you're looking so well today." And I had let down that defense. I wasn't trying to protect the ego anymore. And I thought, what difference does it make what she says, And so if we can just be mindful, bit by bit, how we're trying to defend the territory of the ego. Because really, it's indefensible. You can't defend it. Ultimately, the ego has to go. We can cooperate with that process, or we can resist that process. But we're all in this big rock tumbler. Swami said communities are like rock tumblers, where you put all these rough stones in, and they bump up against each other, and it's kind of painful and knock the edges off. But ultimately, they become beautiful, polished stones. And so if we can allow ourselves to enter the ego, to enter the rock tumbler and say, okay, I'm going to get beat up here, but what's the problem there? I want that. I want, Master says in autobiography in the glorious chapter, probably the pivotal chapter, Years in My Master's Hermitage, where he says, and Sri Yukteswar was brutal with him. He just was always criticizing him and, just calling him on any slight deviance from, what he should be doing. But he knew, Sri Yukteswar knew that Master would be going to the West, and he had to be prepared for misunderstanding and judgment and rejection and belittlement and all the things that he in fact faced when he came to the West in the 1920s. But Master says, for every tooth he loosened in the metaphorical jaw of my ego, I am grateful beyond facility of expression. And so again, we model our lives after the great ones. Every time the ego gets sort of beat up, let's be grateful beyond facility of expression, because that's what we want. I mean, what's the point of meditating and serving if we won't let go of the ego? It's kind of we're pushing the bus, trying to get it unstuck from two ends, and it doesn't move. So with meditation, with service, with devotion, there has to be the attitude of our own absolute unimportance and our own, if any virtue that we have, it's only God. It's God that's shining there, and the great ones know this. And there was a story of a man, a yogi in India, who spent many years of devotion and tapasya, austerities, and so forth. And finally God appeared to him and he said, your great devotion has won my favor, and I will grant you any boon that you want. And the man said, very well. I'm just a wandering sadhu, and the boon I ask of you is, as I wander through the countryside and the villages, wherever my shadow falls on whoever it touches, may that person be healed or blessed or gifted in whatever way he needs, but may I never know. And what a beautiful prayer. Sometimes we do good, but we want the pats on the back. But just to say, I don't ever even want to know what good has come from this. And so to live in that way, where we just allow our lives to be guided. And then remember in the passage from the Bible, and this is important too to remember, where Christ says, using the metaphor of the branch and the vine, that we are just branches of that vine. He said, the branches that don't bear fruit, I cut away. So those souls that are not being channels for God, they get put aside for a little while. But the branches that do bear fruit, I prune, so they can bear more fruit. And that's the process of the ego getting pruned, getting shaped by the saints. And so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be pruned. Don't be afraid to be in that rock tumbler, because it's what we ultimately want. We don't want to go on forever just, there's the line from Macbeth, from Shakespeare's Macbeth, where he says, man is a poor player. Life is a player, a poor actor that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. So we don't want to be just actors strutting and fretting upon the stage and then we're heard no more. There's so much more that we can experience of who we really are. But we have to be willing. The two things that we've touched on. One, to not take credit for the virtue that may flow through us, but to realize it's you, Lord. Just a bulge on the ocean. I'm part of this great branch, this great vine of our line of gurus, and I'm just a little branch of that. So acknowledge that we're connected in that way, and then don't be afraid of the process of getting pruned, because that's what we've come to the Guru for, not just to put balm on our ego, but to say, the Guru comes and says, let me show you the way out. In order to do that, you have to be open to what I bring into your life and not resist it. So if we can combine those two things, we really can begin experiencing more and more the divine nature within us, and the ego becomes less and less and less until it's just like a little bubble that we blow away. Poof, it's gone, and all that remains, as it says in the Gita, is the great effulgence, the great light of God.
I'll say a few words also. So it's a bit of a mystery to contemplate the whole relationship of God, and then God as the soul, and then the soul as the ego. Because ultimately it's all God, but there are layers of, one might say, separation in there. So I had an image that might help explain that. So in many places around the country, I come from Minnesota, so it's one of those places where it's cold in the winter, and they have ice carving contests or ice sculpture contests. So imagine that we're up at Lake Tahoe and there's an ice sculpture contest going on. And so they have taken the water from Lake Tahoe and they've frozen it into a big block, and each sculptor is given a big block. Now, first of all, how does that water, which is liquid, become ice? Well, the temperature has to be lowered, the vibration has to be lowered. And so if the vibration is lowered, that which is liquid becomes solid. So if the vibration of consciousness is lowered, that which is fluid, our astral body, also takes on the appearance of being solid. Our body is far, far from solid, but to our senses, it takes on the appearance of being solid. That's because the vibration, literally the vibration of consciousness, Sri Lahiri Mahashaya said that God is prana in its still form, and prana in its kinetic or vibrating form then has the appearance of solid because it vibrates back and forth between two poles, but so quickly that it looks like it's there permanently. But the very atoms that we have, the subatomic particles, are flashing in and out of existence all the time, but so fast that they seem solid. We think that our body is our body, but scientists tell us that not a single cell of your body is the same as it was 5 years ago. And some of those cells change over very, very quickly, the ones that are used rapidly. And so what is your body? What are you? Are you you? Well, yes and no, but it isn't you as you think. It isn't you solid. It's you as some pattern. So come back to the block of ice that the consciousness has been lowered, the temperature has been lowered, it's been frozen into ice, and then a sculptor comes along, and one sculptor carves a beautiful angel, and another one carves a dragon, and another one carves a 1957 Chevy, and whatever those shapes are. And so that frozen block becomes then carved into something that looks each one different from another. And in this contest, they're all competing. They're all saying, I'm the most beautiful, I'm the best one, that's the ego. I'm separate, I'm better, or, oh my God, I might melt. I've got to get some sort of insulation around me. I need a big bank account. Because I've got to insulate myself from the possibility that I won't be me. And so the ego, the block of ice and the sculpture, they don't have their own free will. But God gives us free will. And so we have the choice of staying in that form that's been formed, and the sculptor has had to sculpt us over many, many, many lifetimes. So we have an attachment to that form. So we're trying to stay in that form. And as long as we're trying to stay in that form, how easy is it to remember that we're just Lake Tahoe? We all came from the same water. We all came from the very same lake. And it's only because fancy frozen boundaries have shaped us differently that we think that we're different. And so because we have free will, then we have a part in this. Because God says that we can stay in a frozen form for as long as we want. But gradually, Master says, there comes a sense of anguishing monotony. There's always within us something yearning. There's always, everybody in this room, including me and including even Devi, has a sense of I want. Isn't that true? I want. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel complete. And why don't we feel complete? Because we won't feel complete until we're reunited, until we melt and are reunited from the waters from which we came. But as long as we're out of that form, there's this desire, and we aren't easily able to say what that desire is. It takes a lot of discrimination. That's why it was a beautiful affirmation. Discrimination says that we came from God and we want to get back to God. But that's a relatively high rate of mental processing of our consciousness. A lower rate says, I'm insecure, I want something. I guess I want a security blanket. I want a big bank account. The 57 Ford sculpture might say, I'm beautiful, but I'm kind of old. I want a new body. I want to be a new Ferrari. And so everyone wants something, but very, very few want what will really satisfy them, which is to melt and merge back into the lake. And so for us as devotees, our job is to increase that yearning, that self-volition, that our own free will, to direct that in the direction of merging back into our true self, because what we see is not what we get. What we see is what we have that separates us, that makes us seem different. So the devotee wants to get back to the state of unity again. And so the practices that are given to us of the spiritual path, meditation, the techniques of meditation, service to others, all of those help move the energy and use the God-given free will to move the energy so that the rate of vibration keeps going higher and higher and more expansive. When you take ice and you begin to increase the rate of vibration and expand it, it turns back into water, and that water goes back into the lake. You take that lake and raise its rate of vibration, and it evaporates and goes into the atmosphere, becomes even more expansive, and so on. So we want to keep expanding until we realize that our true nature is not this frozen little form. Our true nature is that we are part of everything that is. Now we're going to conclude our morning by doing the Festival of Light. And in the Festival of Light, I will read the story of the bird. And that's really the story of the evolution of the soul. And so the bird, the little bird, when Swami wrote that, by the way, it's interesting. He was in Italy, and he had the inspiration to do something because he said that at that time we had just a Sunday service and the minister would give a talk, and perhaps the talk was on, relationships. And so a person coming might think, oh, well, Ananda, they're into relationships. If the next week it was about Hatha Yoga, oh, Ananda, they're into Hatha Yoga. He said we need something that presents the whole of the path in a way that can be given each week. And because it is going to be given, it needs to be in a poetic form. And so within that, he was in Assisi, staying in a little guest house very near where St. Francis and the brothers had caves. It's called Lerimo. And St. Francis, just outside of Assisi, St. Francis and the brothers would go and they would seclude in these caves for weeks on end at times. And so very near there, tuning into that consciousness, Swami wrote this. And he told us later that, he was writing this beautiful ceremony, and then this story of a little bird came into his mind. He said, "What in the world is that?" And he kind of tried to push it away. And it kept coming back, and he pushed it away, and it kept coming back. And so because he was in an uplifted state and the consciousness was just flowing, intuitive super consciousness was flowing, he said, well, let me go with it. And then he wrote that out, and it becomes, if you listen, it's the evolution of the phases of this that the soul goes through in order to evolve. And so it starts out that we come from God, or our parents, a little bird is born, that meaning our soul, and our parents tell us, share with everyone, even as we have shared with you. And so, I don't know if we don't have one here, but the symbol of Ananda, that joy logo, it starts with a kind of a mountain, or a peak at the base. And then the energy comes up from that peak and it starts to go up, and then what happens? It turns and it goes down. And so in the story of the little bird, share with others even as we have shared with you. Be fruitful in the gifts that we have given us, that we have given you. And so that upward momentum is there in our creation. And then the little bird begins to think, but what is wisdom, if not to keep what is mine for myself? See, then it begins to separate, and as it separates, it turns and starts going down. And so that downward turn of separation, what is wisdom, if not to keep what is mine for myself? That can go on for as long as we want it to. What is wisdom? If not, for goodness sake, what is wisdom if not to try to get more money? I don't know if there's anyone in this country that thinks that way. What is wisdom if not to keep what is mine for myself and to push out everybody else who isn't myself? What is wisdom if not for that? And so countless delusions can come in, and so we begin to go down, and then the little bird grows afraid because it's flying in darkness. Well, of course it's flying in darkness, because the consciousness as it goes down begins to darken, as it goes up begins to lighten. And so how can I fly in this darkness? And the night says, peace awaits you in the unknown. Surrender to me, and your strength will be renewed. And so we begin to have fears, we begin to have trouble, we begin to have depressions, we begin to have things happen to us. And how do we get out of that? By affirming our separation? No. Surrender to me. And the tiny rebel finally surrenders and finds the night counsel true. So then that downward direction now turns again and begins to go up. And then the little bird, the nature around it says, find the source of the strength. Your ability to fly has never been your own. Find the source of that strength that gives you the ability. Where do I find that source? Look within. And so as we look within, then we come to the third part, which is the quest, which again takes us in an upward direction. And then finally, the finale of it is that then we merge with God. O children of light, You're perfect souls. Your soul is perfect. You have always been children of light. And so we merge with God, and that reaches the peak. And then in the joy symbol, then because we have a mission, that little bird symbol in the middle comes back down in order to bring that high consciousness and share it with others. So those two are related to each other. I don't know whether Swami consciously thought this through or not, but it's the story of the evolution of the soul. And so when we do the festival, listen to that story, knowing that it's the story of your own self, the story of your soul, the story of your conscious willingness, using your free will to raise. Oh, Prem is bringing the. There we are. Thank you, Prem. So you see how that comes? It comes up. Be fruitful in the gifts we'd given you. Share them with others. Oh, we get up here and think, what is wisdom if not to keep what is mine for myself? And we come back down. And then the Knight's Council tells us to relax and receive. And as we do that, we begin to go up. Then the quest begins. We look within, and eventually we find, and then we come back down to help mankind with the wisdom that we have gained. So as we do this ceremony, listen to the adventure of your own soul, and know that for all of us, what the essence of the spiritual path is to bring ourselves closer to the light of God, closer to the energy of God, which melts the separate form that we are, and we turn into water and dribble back into that beautiful lake.